through their brains with clinical precision.
Wherever I put the glasses, you see an image. Yes. That means that what was here, which you see as a blur, is everywhere and everywhere.
This man was one of the most respected neurosurgeons in the world. Someone who literally touched the brain with his own hands. Karl Pribram. And he discovered something most people are terrified to even consider. Reality isn't found. It's manufactured.
Most of what's going on in the brain is not the circuits. The circuits just tell you, they transmit the information from one place to another. The real work that's being done is by fine fibers, dendrites and teledendrons, which are branches, very fine branches.
If he was right, then your thoughts are not trapped inside your head. They reach out. They change what you see. They build the world you experience. What follows may permanently change the way you see everything.
From this so-called association cortex, which is sensory specific, however, you do get things operating down into the primary projection areas, changing what's going on at the lateral tunicula and even as far down as brainstem and retina. So when I'm thinking something that has to do with vision, I'm actually changing what's going on in the retina.
Karl Pribram spent his career in operating rooms and university labs, not meditation halls. He went into the brain to fix tumors and trauma, not to question reality. But the more he operated and the more he tested, one question refused to leave him alone. Where exactly is a memory hiding?
I was able to show that there were large sectors in the posterior part of the so-called association area, which were not associative at all in the usual sense of the word, of associating sensory things to each other, but had to do, were sensory specific. And I discovered the ventral part of the temporal lobe being visual. That was always thought to be auditory, and that turned out to be visual. Superior temporal was auditory. The superior parietal, posterior, also going over the medial surface into the cuneus, that essentially was somatosensory. Discovered where the taste area was, anterior to the auditory, the primary taste area, and then the more associative or higher order taste areas in the temporal pole.
It started as a quiet puzzle inside operating rooms and laboratories. Again and again, surgeons removed large parts of the brain. But memories, they didn't neatly vanish the way textbooks insisted they should. A patient could lose the ability to speak smoothly or recognize a face, yet still recall the layout of their childhood home, the smell of a garden, the way their mother laughed. It was as if the memories refused to live in a single place. Before Karl Pribram ever questioned the mystery, another scientist had already spent decades chasing it. His name was Carl Lashley, a man who dedicated nearly 30 years searching for the engram, the physical trace of a memory. He trained rats to run mazes, then cut, burned, and sliced through their brains with clinical precision. He took tiny pieces, large pieces, deep layers, outer layers, yet no matter what he destroyed, no single spot ever held the memory hostage. The animal struggled but never forgot completely. Something about this defied the logic of anatomy. When Pribram later reviewed these experiments and added his own surgical findings, the conclusion hit him with unexpected force.
I made the large removals trying to find out what agnosias were about, essentially, or frontal lobe lesions, lobotomies were all about, and found something. And then I pursued the findings. And the holographic thing comes really out of the clinical studies that showed that individual memories aren't lost, and we then found that also with smaller lesions in the brain, that individual engrams or memory traces are not lost. That means it's distributed.
Memories aren't isolated files sitting in tidy brain folders. Memories aren't individual memories that can be lost. That means it's distributed. It was like burning the corner of a photograph and still seeing the whole picture printed in the ashes. Whatever the brain was doing, it wasn't acting like a hard drive. It was acting like something else entirely. For years, the problem sat there like an unsolved crime scene. Surgeons could erase tissue, but they could not erase the past. The question haunted Pribram until a completely different field offered an unexpected clue. Holography, a world built not on images, but on interference patterns. Waves overlapping, canceling, and reinforcing until an entire picture is hidden inside a blur of frequencies. Pribram encountered a simple but unsettling fact about holograms. Cut a hologram in half, and the entire image still appears. Diminished, yes, but whole. A perfect echo of Lashley's rats, his own lesion studies, and the stubborn endurance of memories that refuse to die with the tissue around them. Suddenly, Lashley's mystery snapped into focus. Distributed memory, interference patterns, a whole image in every part. The brain wasn't storing snapshots, it was storing patterns. It was weaving reality into waves. The discovery should have ended the mystery, but instead it cracked open another one, far more unsettling than the first. Pribram had set out to understand memory and perception, not to trespass into the territory of quantum physics. Yet the deeper he studied how neurons interacted, not as isolated spikes, but as overlapping fields of activity, the more familiar the mathematics began to look. Long before he arrived, Dennis Gabor had used the same equations to describe how holograms store information. And those equations originally came from the world of uncertainty, wave functions and quantum events. That alone was unsettling, and it only grew stranger as the patterns repeated themselves.
Gabor in 1968, we talked about it. I talked about Fourier transforms with him. Says the brain doesn't work on a Fourier transform. It's not. That's the basis of it. It's not the whole thing. But the guy never told me that he'd invented a better way. I had to find that out for myself. And he was that kind of a person. I heard from somebody at Virginia Tech a few years back who was a friend of Gabor's, that Gabor once said, if anybody's going to figure out how the brain works, Carl Pribram. I felt just wonderful. But you know what that man put me through, he and also our friend Don Mackay. I would talk about Fourier transforms and holograms. They said, too simple. Isn't going to work. Never did he tell me that he had figured out in 1946, before he did the hologram, that of these Gabor functions, that the brain can work in terms of quanta of information. That's what, but he never told me, but I did find out.
Pribram found himself facing a comparison he never intended to make. The mathematical descriptions of how neurons interact are very similar to the descriptions of quantum events. He reviewed his data again and again, expecting the resemblance to be superficial, an illusion created by metaphor, but it held. They obey the same rules. It's not just an analogy. He hadn't borrowed equations from physics to decorate a theory. He hadn't tried to force the brain to look mysterious. The data came first, waves of presynaptic potentials overlapping in dendritic fields. And only after mapping them did he see that the mathematics matched what physicists have been using for decades.
So let's look into Lashley's idea of interference patterns, because at least we don't know that it's wrong. We haven't a clue as to what he meant. Lashley didn't have a clue. I talked to him for months about this stuff, and he finally wrote a retraction. Says, I don't know what I mean by interference pattern. Within a week, an article came out in, first Nico Spinelli found an article of John Eccles, because one of the problems was, what is a wavefront in the cortex like? What's it caused by? What would that mean? An interference pattern has to be interference among wavefronts. Found an article of John Eccles on neurophysiology of imagination. And in it he says, we do study synaptic potentials and all of that at the end of axons, but we only study one at a time. When an axon comes down to dendritic field, it splits, and you have a lot of these presynaptic potential occurring at one time. That can be thought of as a wavefront. And I said, how stupid. For 10, 15 years, we've been trying to figure out how a wavefront could be created in the brain, and it isn't the kind of thing Köhler was talking about. What's left? And Eccles had it right on. It's not, you don't have to even think of it as a wavefront if you don't want to, but you can. It's a lot of presynaptic potentials, and they set up postsynaptic potentials. They are graded potential changes.
The realization was almost philosophical. It means your brain isn't just like a quantum system in a poetic way. It might be behaving like one in disguise. A system built from probabilities, fields, and distributed patterns hidden beneath the clean lines of anatomy. And if that's true, then reality itself might have another layer you never see. Defocus a lens and you see a blur. Nothing sharp, nothing recognizable. But Pribram said that the blur is essentially a hologram. Contained in that smudge of scattered light is the actual image, waiting to be brought back into focus.
It's a very well-regulated scatter. For instance, if you defocus a lens on a camera so that you don't get the image falling on the image plane, and you have a blur, that blur essentially is a hologram.
Oh.
Because all you have to do is
refocus
it.
So contained in the blur is the actual image.
That's right, but you don't see it as such.
It was his way of showing that information does not need to appear as form to still be fully present. The brain, he believed, worked the same way. He called this realm the spectral domain, a place where information is stored not as shapes in space, but as frequencies and patterns. The spectral domain is a real phenomenon. It is not just a way of looking at the world. In this domain, the world is not organized the way your eyes tell you it is. Space dissolves into probability. Structure dissolves into waves. Everything is distributed.
The spectral domain, so-called holographic domain, because that's what a hologram is these spots here that have different values. So the silver grains are just a bunch of spots that on a holographic film, that this spectral domain is in fact a real phenomenon. It is not just a way of looking at the world. It has an existence. Everybody will admit that you can look at psychophysical and physiological and physical phenomena either through the spectral way or through space-time, and that they're related by the Fourier transform, but they won't agree that the spectral domain is necessarily there. It's just a way of looking at it, and what is there is just, it's just there. And we have ways of looking at what is there.
This idea echoed the work of physicist David Bohm, who described a hidden level of reality he called the implicate order, a world where everything is folded into everything else, and nothing stands alone. In that order, space and time blur. Location stops being simple. Everything exists everywhere at once, as possibility rather than position. If Pribram was right, your brain may be constantly shifting between this hidden domain and the ordinary world, translating waves into objects and blur into meaning. And if your brain is working in that domain, where exactly do you end and the rest of the universe begin? One question bothered Pribram, even after the hologram insight settled into place. If the brain truly uses something like interference patterns and spectral codes, why would evolution choose such a complicated method? The answer turned out to be surprisingly practical. Why would the brain bother with this spectral domain? Because there, correlations are cheap. In simple terms, the brain can compare patterns far faster in frequency form than in ordinary space. A signal that looks messy and scattered in physical space becomes clean and easy to sort once it's turned into waves. You already see this kind of trick every time a hospital machine builds an image of the body. MRI scans, CAT scans, and most modern image processors work by converting shapes into frequencies, matching patterns quickly, and then flipping the results back into a picture. The brain seems to do its own version of this.
Those of you who work in hospitals know what a CAT scan is, or a magnetic resonance imaging. All of the image processing devices are done in this way. You put a beam through the skull, and it comes out with certain numbers, and another one, different directions. You just add them all together. You first convert them into the spectral domain, into the Fourier domain, and then add them all together, convolve them essentially, or multiply, whatever. It's a sort of a funny mixture between the two. And then do the inverse transform, you've got a beautiful three-dimensional image. So that's why.
As you move through the world, it constantly performs a kind of inverse transform, turning invisible spectral activity into solid objects, edges, colors, and movement. That is how you get object perception. What your eyes receive is only raw data. What you finally experience is the brain's reconstruction. You think you just look around and see the world, but under the hood, your brain is running a high-speed holographic reconstruction, 24 hours a day. And in that reconstruction, something strange happens to the old battle between mind and matter. For centuries, philosophers have argued over a single question. Is the mind separate from the brain, or is it just what the brain does? Pribram believed both views missed something important. He said mind and brain are two different ways of talking about something. Realizations of a process. The process comes first, the forms come after. He compared it to a symphony. The same music can live as sheet notes in a book, as a tape in a drawer, as a digital file on a server, or as a live performance filling a concert hall. Different forms, one invisible pattern. None of them is the real symphony on its own, yet each one reveals it.
And you want to get a really good recording of Beethoven's Ninth, and you want to hear it. Well, you just find out that choral is coming in and so on, and they're going to give a performance at Davies Hall. So that's one way you can appreciate. Another one is you can get a tape. Another way is to get a record. Still another is a disc, compact disc. There are all these various ways, or if you're a musician, you might, and if you're a conductor, you might even get the score, right? Now, all of those are realizations of something, aren't they? Of the symphony. If you know how to read music, if you know how to do these things, you can recognize all of this as the Beethoven Symphony. What is the Beethoven Symphony then? See? It's realized in all of these ways.
Your brain is like the hardware. Your conscious experience is like the performance. Both express the same underlying information in different ways. And once you see it this way, the old question of separation begins to lose its force. What if consciousness and matter are just two sides of one song, the universe listening to itself through you? And if that's true, then your memories, your thoughts, even time itself might not be trapped inside your skull. There is a quiet shock buried inside Pribram's work, and it touches your life far more directly than any equation or laboratory experiment. When you remember your childhood bedroom, you're not pulling out a file stored in some hidden drawer of the brain. You're rebuilding a world from interference patterns, the same way a hologram can rebuild an image from scattered waves. Every detail you recall, the color of the curtains, the warmth of the light, the way the air felt, is reconstructed in the moment. Memory is not retrieval. Memory is creation. And it doesn't stop with remembering. You don't just see the world, you render it. The world you experience is assembled by your brain from raw signals and spectral patterns. What you call reality is a reconstruction made possible by a system that never stops translating, comparing, and shaping. If your brain works holographically, then you are not just a spectator sitting behind your eyes. You're part of the process that makes reality appear the way it does for you. You participate in every perception, every memory, every moment of awareness.
The hologram is really the big breakthrough that was made in the early 60s into sort of a window on another way of looking at things. And not only looking at things, but when you look through the window, you see an order in the universe that's different from our ordinary experience. That doesn't mean we don't experience it. When we're listening to music, we sort of get the feel that something is wrong, that beat isn't quite right, and so on and so forth. So obviously we already are aware of what's going to come, and all of that fits into this order in the universe where time and space become full.
This leads to a question that refuses to go away. Maybe your mind isn't inside reality. Maybe reality, at least the one you live in, is inside your mind. Not as fantasy, but as a continuous act of interpretation that turns possibility into experience. And once you realize that, you can finally see what Pribram spent a lifetime trying to show us. His journey reads like an unlikely chain of events. A surgeon who couldn't find a single memory trace. A physicist who described a hidden order beneath space and time. A theory suggesting your brain is less of a storage box and more of a living hologram that reassembles reality in real time. Put together, they point to something much larger than neuroscience alone. Karl Pribram didn't just ask how the brain works, he asked what kind of universe would allow a brain like yours to exist. His answer was unsettling, elegant, and difficult to forget. The scientist who found that your brain isn't a storage device but a hologram of reality left us with one disturbing possibility. You might not be inside the universe might be inside you.